Hello and welcome to another episode of the Daily Seeds of Flourishing. So I suppose it was only inevitable that in a series where I look at my own personal flourishing and just putting ideas out there generally for flourishing, I'd get around to talking about In Our Time. If you're not familiar with In Our Time, it's started out as a BBC radio series. It still is, and it started in October 1998. It's been presented by Melvyn Bragg since then. It's one of the BBC's most successful discussion programmes, and this series has basically formed the backbone of my, I suppose you could say, my intellectual interests, particularly in the areas of philosophy. So the basic format of the program is pretty much unchanged. It involves a discussion between Melvyn Bragg and his guests, which now is three top-class academics, and they talk around a particular subject for the week, and we'll get on and see some of the things they talk about if you're not familiar with it. I think when the series first started it was 2 guests, and then they moved it up to 3. Now, what's obviously cool with the modern world we're living in and podcasts is obviously it was inevitable that the radio series would end up also being released as podcasts. So in 2004 they started making the program available as a podcast from the BBC website, from iTunes at that point. But obviously over time, once Spotify started getting into podcasts, it's become available through there, but also other podcatchers. And so you can pull down any episode from the archive. The whole archive is up there. There's been a slight change recently, which I'll get to. So you can see here as of the 19th of May 2021, which is quite a long time ago, it had 908 episodes. If we go on to the actual In Our Time website, you can see that they're actually up to 962. Now we're in a period now from July through to September where there's a summer break for Melvyn, and so during that period they run repeats. So the one that's available now is the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which is one of the summer repeats. So they just repeat stuff from the archive, and then come 15th of September we'll be back to new episodes. The series is divided into 5 categories: culture, history, philosophy, religion, science, although some of the episodes will fall into more than one category. But what's nice about organising it like that is if you're using any form of podcatching device, software or app, or you're listening to it through Spotify, I think it's the same on Spotify, you can choose to just listen to the culture archive or the history archive or the philosophy archive. I tend to gravitate around the philosophy archive, so for my particular app that I use for podcatching, I have this whole archive, and every time a new episode comes up that falls into that particular category, that gets added to that so I can listen to it. Now, I don't know if I'd mentioned, there's been a change recently, I'd say in the last couple of months. I find it a little bit irritating, but it's not insurmountable. So they've started doing this new things where they release the new episodes for In Our Time through the BBC Sounds website and the BBC Sounds app. But there is a delay of something like 4 weeks, so around a month, from when it gets released on BBC Sounds to when it now appears on any of the other podcasting services. So that's the big difference now. Now, I must admit, although I'd sort of caught up with the episodes, it's not such a big deal now, because I've actually decided to just lag behind by about 4 weeks. And because the episodes aren't necessarily an in-the-moment episode, so not always topical to what's going on in the world. In fact, hardly ever, I suppose. Current history. It's not a big deal for me listening to an episode that's 4 weeks old. So I just listen to it now through the regular podcatcher. And also, I don't always listen to the summer repeats unless something particularly of interest for me, like I might choose to re-listen to this one again. I definitely tend to gravitate around the philosophy ones. And I did a bit of a listening project last year where I actually went through the whole of the philosophy archive and listened to it from the oldest to the newest. And I think when I did that, it was probably somewhere up to here at the time. And then going forward, I then just picked it up and went through here. And you can see in some instances that particular archive isn't just philosophers, it might be philosophical concepts as well. And as I've mentioned, you might find that some of these that are in the philosophy category may end up also turning up in another archive as well. Like history or culture. But yeah, I mean, every episode has its own merits. It's just obviously depending what you're interested in. You might find some episodes more appealing than others. The other thing is that they often tend to reuse contributors because they just work so well. So you'll often find the same academic or expert cropping up across multiple episodes in certain categories. Like, I've lost count of the amount of episodes I've listened to with AC Grayling or Angie Hobbs in it, simply because they make excellent contributors. And they always can explain themselves very well. But it's always fun to go back and listen to earlier contributors who maybe have subsequently passed away, or maybe people you don't hear of so much on BBC Radio, like some of the American philosophers. So yeah, definitely worthwhile checking out if you're not already aware of it. And as I've said, it's a series that has contributed greatly to my mental flourishing, and sowed the seeds of a lot of various interests as well over the years, one of which is obviously philosophy. But other times I used to sometimes I think about 3 or 4 years ago, I would listen to an episode and then spend a week doing research on that episode. It was pretty rewarding. I used to do that a lot more when I worked for myself. There's quite a lot of work involved, and I didn't have any particular other things that were competing with that at the time. But that was another worthwhile flourishing project that I did based around this particular series. So I hope you've enjoyed my expose of In Our Time, the radio series. Thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in the next episode.